Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third event of our events week, Identity Defined, where the ABBA are each evening exploring a different aspect of our identity and what the Bible has to say about it. My name is Dixie. I'm a first year history student and part of the CU and here in ABBA, and I'll be hosting this evening. And this evening I'm joined by Thomas Kendall, who will be giving us a talk defined by my vote. Does my allegiance to the left or right encapsulate who I am? But firstly, hi Tom, how are you? Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit for us?
Hi Dixie, yeah, great to be with you. Glad you're studying history. I also studied history, although with international relations as well, at Exeter University. Yeah, I now live in North London. Don't know, what do you want to know? Passionate Arsenal fan, love Spotify, and a coffee snob. But some of those things you can't really do at the moment, but that's okay. Spotify you can.
That's true. Oh, fun. Yeah, I don't have any interest in those, but that's cool. Before Tom gives us a talk, there's going to be a link in the comments on Facebook Live where throughout Tom's talk you can put any questions in that you may have. They will be anonymous, and after Tom's finished talking we'll have a little Q&A session where we'll try and answer those questions for you. So that will be a link in the comments to a Slido or something form. So yeah, Tom, do you want to give us your talk?
Yeah, great, thanks. It's great to be with you guys tonight. My job is to kind of think about politics and the Christian faith kind of full time. I do that in London, as I said, and so it's a joy to be with you guys in Wales or wherever you're watching this from tonight. Yeah, as we think about this question, defined by my vote, does my allegiance to the left or right encapsulate who I am? I wanted to start by thinking back to some of the kind of major political events of the last 10 years. Think back with me, if you like, to the 23rd of June, 2016, Brexit Day. You settle down for the night, you turn on the news, and you wait for the votes to come rolling in. Initially, things seem to be swinging in favour of Remain, and then in the early hours of the morning, Leave votes start pouring in, and they don't stop until the votes close, with 52% in favour of leaving and 48% in favour of remaining. How did you feel on that night? How did you feel as the votes came in, or was that switch point in the early hours of the morning? Perhaps you were too young to be involved, perhaps you didn't care, but I wonder how you felt over the next kind of 4 years, the last 4 years we've just gone through. How did you feel about the fallout as the debate unfolded? How did you feel as no deal was threatened, or as a second referendum was proposed? What did you make of Parliament and all its squabbling? How did you feel on the 31st of January 2020 when we officially left? Or just a few months ago when the trade deal was negotiated? How did you feel? What did you make of it? What side did you take in your debates with family and friends? How far were you willing to push the issue? Did you lose friends? Did you lose family members? Did you make dinner conversation awkward? We'll take another event, December 2019 election, a bit more recent. After years of parliamentary gridlock, the Brexit debate, MP resignations, new party alliances, with two widely mistrusted leaders at the helm, an election was called. How did you feel on that December evening? Can you remember where you were as the votes came in? Who were you hoping would win? As that exit poll came in that December evening, were you appalled? Were you delighted? What did you think as the one by one, the bricks in that red wall turned blue? How did you feel as the SNP surged through Scotland, taking all but 11 seats, or as the Lib Dems collapsed despite their promising stance? What was your response as Labour slumped to its worst defeat in 84 years? Who did you campaign for, I wonder? Who did you fight for on social media? Who did you put up posters for? Who did you represent in your dinner discussions with your friends and family? Or consider a more geographically distant but more recent election of Biden and Trump. As the 3rd of November rolled around, who were you hoping to see in the White House? Had you spent the previous 4 years in bitter anger, rage, and disappointment? Did you look across the pond with sadness and dismay? Or were you one of the few in the UK who were happy with the Trump years? Did this election prove a bitter pill to swallow, or was it relief? And I guess the big question is, how would you have felt if it had gone the other way? If you look at all these things, and particularly this one, what would your public comments reveal about your thoughts on Trump or Biden? Have you treated others in these debates with respect and dignity, or sought to undermine, abuse, and diminish those on the other side? How far would you be willing to get your own way politically? 3 big events, 6 different sides, not all clear matters of left and right, but there's some clear links. And as you answered those questions and thought back to those events, what were your reflections? What did you think? Did your political allegiances drive your behaviour then, at each of those 3 events? Does your political allegiance drive your behaviour now? Does it influence the way you define your world? Does it influence the way you define other people? If so, your political allegiances, chances are they do define you, at least in large parts. This is something I've definitely found for myself. I was recently told the other week by my housemate that I managed to make every conversation political. It started as a joke, but within a few weeks, I'd realised that this is so true. Within minutes of meeting someone, I could be knee deep in a chat about Brexit or the economy or how you do any number one of issues. And so I guess it's a good job there aren't any parties at the moment, because I'd be the boring guy ruining it in the corner. In all seriousness, no, this reveals a great deal about the way we perceive the world, about the way we define solutions and propose answers to situations. It tells us a great deal about ourselves and the ways we think the world should be. It affects the way we interact with other people. And it means we define people as allies or people who are opponents, people to be won over, ignored, or at worst, fought with. Whilst in many ways, I guess this maybe presents a negative picture. You might have answered all those questions and felt negative thoughts about all this or political allegiances. As I said, no one kind of wants to be caught up in all this political pressure, being the boring guy in the corner. And yet, there are real and good reasons for our allegiances and political persuasions, aren't there? From what I can tell in conversations with friends and family and in the media, the typical caricature of politicians presents them as lazy, incompetent, selfish, and self-absorbed. People who are intent on wealth, power, influence, who don't have to work a hard day in their life. And whilst I'm sure this is true for some, from my experience working in Parliament, my experience of being involved in political circles for several years, the vast majority of those that get involved simply do so to make the world a better place. That's their drive, that's what motivates them to go and do this. And so we're passionate about politics, aren't we? We want a better world to live in. We're passionate about the left or the right, or whatever tradition you align with, somewhere or another one. And we are because we think they present a better path to the future, a better world. Just think about some of the political catchphrases that have been bandied around in recent years. One of the current ones seems to be "Build Back Better." It presents a positive vision, doesn't it, of a post-COVID life, of a world where we've solved the climate crisis, of where we've been able to alleviate poverty and inequality and injustice in the world, as we use this pandemic as an opportunity to rebirth ourselves, to build something better. Or take another phrase, kinder, gentler politics. Who doesn't want a politics that is kinder and gentler, where their opponents are treated with respect and dignity, where it's not toxic, where we don't diminish each other? People long for that better world. They long for us to be able to agree on what the good life looks like and to work in harmony to get there. We want a kinder and gentler politics. As controversial as it may be, even the phrase "Make America Great Again" is set on a positive vision of the future. The idea of restoring America, of being perceived as great, of achieving great things, of working together to do good things together. or get Brexit done. The simple cliched thing we got used to time and time again a year or so ago. But yet, what was the kind of mantra behind it? If we get rid of all this Brexit rubbish, if we get rid of all the debate and the gridlock, we'll be able to build a better future, a global Britain, all these catchphrases. Each one of these campaigns, each one of those slogans, seeks to present a positive vision of the future, one that will deal with our problems and put the world to rights. We want injustice to be punished. We want poverty to be alleviated. We want peace and prosperity. We want to live in harmony with fellow humans. We want to live in harmony with our land and the creatures that inhabit it. We long for equality, for common decency, and for respect. Seriously, we want to live in a world, don't we, where school kids don't go hungry, where pandemics don't devastate lives through death, lockdown, and financial ruin, where our friends and family aren't racially abused or marginalised, where teenagers don't stab each other on the streets, where domestic abuse doesn't destroy the lives of so many in this country. We want to live in a world where those with disabilities aren't discriminated against and marginalised. We want to live in a world which isn't on the brink of environmental degradation and collapse. We want justice, we want equality, we want honesty, integrity, fairness, freedom, and we want support to be able to achieve these things. So in many ways, it's no wonder, is it? It's no wonder that our allegiances to the left or the right, or whatever your tradition may be, is so strong. As we go about life and are shaped by our experiences, our upbringing, our education, and our desires, we find more often than not, don't we, that one political tradition, one party maybe identifies with us more than the others. We find we agree with their proposed goals and how to get there. We find them plausible, and so we commit. We learn to fight, we learn to scrap. We learn what makes them tick, and we fight for these goals because, as we've just said, they're important. And for some, they are matters of life and death. We're not being trite here. Some of these things, housing regulation, or whether your kids go hungry, whether you get that disability payment, it can be a real matter of life and death. We're not messing around here. These things matter, don't they? And yet the byproduct is that other parties and other sides, those with different allegiances, tend to get in the way. They impede our vision of the good life. They obstruct through Parliament in protests at the ballot box, through social media campaigning, through campaigns and signatures. And so we begin to view them as the enemy. They don't share our methods and they can't share our goals, and so they're a problem that's got to be dealt with. Our vote can define us positively. What are we for? Well, we're for justice or equality or freedom, but they can also define us negatively. Who or what are we against? We see the mob a few weeks ago, 6th of January, rushing into the capital, and we are amazed. How could anyone trash democracy in this way? How could anyone treat their policymakers or their country in such a way? And yet we might be more than happy to pack the Supreme Court or increase the state count so that we can ensure a democrat future. We react with fury at the way Remainers label Brexiteers racist, dumb, even scum. But we're happy to belittle and demean them, aren't we, as enemies of the people or Remoaners. We're disgusted at the anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, but we're willing to overlook the discrimination our own party might perpetrate. We call for a kinder, gentler politics, and yet we bully, abuse, and slag others off left, right, and centre all over Twitter. Just spend 5 minutes, look through the comments, and you'll be deeply dismayed at the state of our world. You see, when we think we alone have the answers, when our political allegiances encapsulate everything we do, we're quite willing to turn a blind eye to the abuse or the injustice on our own side. We're quite willing to manipulate situations for our own benefit. and we're very unwilling to compromise or accept common goals or shared humanity with our opponents. And whilst this division can be unpleasant, I don't think it's the biggest problem that comes around when our political allegiances encapsulate all that we do. The biggest problem is that our political allegiances do not deliver on what they promise. We build our lives, don't we, on these visions, on these promises, and yet we remain stuck in a world that is broken, in a world where there is famine, poverty, abuse, inequality, where there's death, war, and crime. And that's just to mention obvious wrongs that none of us want, let alone the day-to-day frustrations and pain we feel as relationships with family and friends or partners are tense and break down, as work proves unfulfilling or completely draining and overwhelming, as we find ourselves struggling to stay afloat of uni work in the middle of a pandemic, or caring for our loved ones, or staying afloat in our mental health. If I think we're honest, the pandemic has shown us anything, it's the utter powerlessness of governments and humanity to control the world and the way things go, to achieve our visions with perfection and harmony. Take the Tory party, as we said, they swung through to a landslide election in 2019. They promised to get Brexit done. They had this great agenda of levelling up the country. And yet, 12 months down the line, we're looking at over 118,000 dead, an extortionate amount of national debt, a society that is battered and bruised, locked up in isolation, separated from their loved ones. Another example I find quite compelling is the election of Barack Obama. Elected on a wave of public euphoria, the first African-American president, a symbol of hope and a vessel for a million different dreams, he himself quotes in his book. And whilst people watching this might have different opinions on what Obama did and didn't achieve, America continues to be riven with poverty, inequality, racial division, and violence. Arguably, we're even more divided now than we were then. Even if you consider Obama's presidency to be one of unqualified success, Trump came in and stood against much of what Obama stood for, simply revealing the limitations of politics, the limitations of our leaders, the limitations of our political parties. And look at Trump's promise to make America great again. Again, different opinions on what Trump did or didn't achieve. But no one, I don't think, would argue that America is in a great place domestically or internationally, as was promised. We look in the wrong place. We place our hopes and dreams in leaders and ideas that cannot deliver. And we seek to enforce them regardless. We increasingly have to resort to desperate measures to be able to do so. And this is how we end up with a kinder, gentler politics, a party that called for that, being deemed to have carried out unlawful acts by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. This is how we end up turning a blind eye to the character flaws of our leaders and calling for the destruction of all who oppose us. We look in the wrong place and it doesn't deliver. It leads to a destructive politics and a broken world. Our allegiances fail us and they lead us astray. And this is something that the Bible makes clear too. King David, famous David and Goliath, was Israel's greatest and best king. He said this in a song that he wrote: "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." Horses and chariots were the super tech of the day, the military embodiment of strength and power. To put your trust in these things seemed sensible then. It was a sign of trust in your own wealth, your own power, your own strength. I guess the modern equivalent would be the great big aircraft carriers or cyber warfare technicians. It's easy, isn't it? Easy to do. It makes a lot of sense. Why wouldn't you trust in your own military strength, your own political power, your own diplomacy? But did you see David said something different? We are to trust in the name of the Lord our God. You see, like trusting in our political allegiances, horses and chariots seem the smart thing to do. They're powerful, they give us confidence, they provide a way forward, and they look threatening to others. They propose a means by which we get what we want: security, peace, prosperity. And yet, in that same song, just a few verses later, David writes that they fail, they fall, they simply don't work. Chariots and horses can be defeated, can't they? A bigger army can come along. A new general with smashing tactics or different military equipment can render all your power and your might meaningless within minutes. It's the same with our political allegiances, is it not? Our party or leader loses an election. A pandemic comes along and destroys everything you promised to do in your manifesto. Your opponents develop clever plans and parliamentary techniques to obstruct the bill or policy that you want to implement. People disagree with you, won't give you the funding, they obstruct you at every single moment. The money that your project requires simply does not exist. Horses and chariots fail. So how do we get the security, the peace, and the prosperity that we long for? David tells us it's through God, the creator of everyone and everything, the Lord of all, the designer and creator of the world in which we live. David believes in this, the all-powerful God, the one who can send help, the one who is mighty to save, who is victorious in power, and can deem whether things succeed or fail. Our political leaders and parties talk a good game, and yet we find ourselves frustrated, disappointed, and angry. We find ourselves battling the same old problems, challenges, and things that are outside of our control. And yet God promises a world of equity, of righteousness, which is a Hebrew word for justice. He promises shelter for the oppressed and the weak. And he promises to never abandon those who put their trust in him. Another psalm, another song puts it like this: the Lord reigns forever. He has established his throne for judgment. He rules the world in righteousness, for that be justice. And he judges the people with equity. The Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. Those who know your name trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. See, God is a political leader, a king, not that we use that term for our leaders, who is gentle and kind, who forgives and heals. His is a vision of the future that will never fail or disappoint. Being his citizen is an identity that gives more than it gets. But how can we trust this, you say? Is not religion and the source of all war and bigotry? And this is where we Christians, this is where we as a CU look to Jesus. Jesus, God come to earth to show us what it looks like to be in God's kingdom. The CU has been using Luke, a biography of Jesus, and I'm sure they'd love to go through Luke with you after this event if you're interested, and look more at what Jesus' life, look more at this kingdom that he proclaims. I'm going to read from another biography now, one called Mark. In Mark, Jesus comes, and in the first chapter, he says this: the time has come, the kingdom of God is near, repent and believe the good news. And what does he show us about his kingdom? Well, if you read through Mark or if you read through Luke with the CU afterwards, you will see a king who time and time again gives his life, gives his time, his energy for his people. He's one who associates with the lowest of the low, who cares for the poor and needy, who challenges those who abuse their power and authority, who offers hope and redemption to all those who have been ostracized and cut off by their communities. If you read through Jesus' biography, you will see a kingdom in which greatness does not come from pride or power or wealth, but through humility, service, and gentleness. And crucially, you will see a king who willingly dies for his people, that they might be freed from oppression and injustice that is perpetrated against them and that is perpetrated against them, by them. I don't know about you, but this is a king I want to serve. This is a political leader who is worth my allegiance. But note the appropriate response. The kingdom of God is near. Repent and believe the good news. You see, it requires that we repent. We've rejected this king. We've said we don't want to be in your kingdom. We don't want you as our political leader. We don't want to give you our allegiance. We don't even want to recognize him most of the time. And so it's right. Jesus says it's right that if we want to be part of this kingdom, we must repent, we must apologize and ask that he might let us back in, that his death might count for us too, that we might be freed from the oppression and the injustice that we have perpetrated against others and that others perpetrate against us, that we too might be able to put our hope in this good news. Some trust in horses and some trust in chariots, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. This is where our hope and political allegiance is based, in the one who promises a government of justice and peace, of hope for the oppressed and joy for the downtrodden. This is an allegiance worth being encapsulated by. So I guess as we finish, will you be defined by your vote in your allegiance to the left or the right? Or will you be defined by the one who truly governs, who truly delivers the security, the peace, and the prosperity that we long for? Thanks.
Thank you for that, Tom. That was really interesting. I do believe we have a bunch of questions for you. So first one being, should Christians become politicians?
Should Christians become politicians? Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think we should. So my job is basically to make this argument left, right, and centre. I think everyone in the public square has their vision of the good life, don't they? Everyone has things that they're passionate about, as we've been saying. Everyone has things and wants to make the world a better place. And I think Christians are no different. And I don't see why Christians therefore shouldn't get involved. And actually, we're told in the Bible to love our neighbour. We're told in the Bible to care for those around us. And I think serving publicly and serving in politics is a really good way of doing that. And so I am firmly of the conviction, that Christians should go into politics.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Tom. We do have another one for you.
Yeah, go for it.
If all Christians try to follow the Bible, how can we disagree in politics? Surely everyone should just agree.
Yeah, good question. That is a very good question. So I don't think the Bible gives us, it's not a political manifesto, so to speak. It doesn't give us a policy on how we should do healthcare, how we should do disability payments or welfare payments. It doesn't tell us how we should run an economy. It gives us wisdom and it gives us advice. And in certain settings, there are explicit commands. But if you read the Bible correctly, the different time periods and the different people for which these commands are given should impact what we say. I think the Bible gives Christians a big voice in terms of their conscience. So wisdom and conscience are two things that I would go to here. As I said, there's no manifesto. And so I think Christians are free to disagree on what we want to achieve and how we ought to achieve it. I think, having said that, though, there are some general principles that all Christians should pursue. The Bible talks about pursuing justice and caring for the vulnerable and the needy. A kind of line that kind of encapsulates this is Christians are to care for the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner. That's something that should characterize God's people. However, having said that, I think we're allowed to disagree on how we do that. So that's the command, that's what we should do, but how we get there and what we want to implement policy-wise to achieve that goal, I think is up for debate. Does that help? Feel free to come back on that.
No, that's really helpful. Very interesting. Thank you. Another one for you. Is it better for Wales and Scotland to become independent of the UK? If so, would the Bible agree?
Oh, that is a great question. Big topic at the moment, isn't it? I don't want to give kind of my political opinion on this. That wouldn't really be appropriate in this setting. I know Christians from Plaid Cymru, from S&P, who would definitely argue that, yeah, the Bible makes a good case for independence in both these settings. And I can see that. I can see how you look at the Bible and say having greater control over how to care for your local community at a more local level is a good thing. I think I can see that. But I also know plenty of Christians that would disagree with that and would also make biblical arguments. And this is where I come back to the kind of wisdom idea. We don't have a manifesto. We don't have a way that tells us how we should govern our society. But you can look and see different arguments for different things. I think, again, it comes back to that question of how do we achieve justice? You might passionately believe that you can pursue justice through either devolved government or through independence. I think that's fair enough argument. Others would say we're better doing that together. And yeah.
Well, thank you. Another one for you. You've got quite a few.
Mm.
How does God view the law people have made, so man-made law?
Great question. Depends on the law. So one thing that I think is really helpful here is one of the history books of ancient Israel. It's called Kings, and it basically just trots you through the history of all the different kings that Israel had. And it's quite a devastating kind of little chunk where basically it lists off each king and then whether they did right in the eyes of God or whether they did wrong. Lots of them did wrong, and Israel was punished accordingly. God was very displeased with a lot of what Israel did under some of their kings. Again, I think we come back to this question of justice. Justice is defined biblically as loving God appropriately and loving our neighbour. So as we look at the Bible, as we look at human laws, we've got to be asking, are these laws pursuing justice? Do these laws love God, and do they love mankind or humanity? I think lots of laws do. I'm very grateful to live in the UK where the poor more or less are cared for, that there is a desire for that, where we treat people with respect and dignity, where justice is a concern for many. And yeah, I think there's also lots of things that we get wrong and lots of things that God wouldn't be so pleased with.
Thank you. An interesting answer. Another one for you. If God is always right, should we be a theocracy?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, cool.
Theocracy has done immense damage in this world. You just have to look back a couple of hundred years, you go back even further, and countries that have claimed to speak on behalf of God have done immense evil. They have oppressed, they have abused, they have tortured, they have gone to war, and they have punished anyone that disagrees with them even slightly. I don't see in the Bible any argument for theocracy. I think God says that his kingdom is coming at some point. Jesus comes to give us a taste of it. He's like the example of the flavor of what it might look like. And that kingdom will come one day. Then we will live under God's perfect rule. But for now, we live under governments. God has given secular governments authority. He's given governments of all different types and sizes authority that they might pursue justice and care for the people they govern. My concern with theocracy is you start trying to persecute people for their sins or trying to implement the future kingdom now. And I think that only leads to devastation. And I think actually that's one of we're in a secular country now, we're in a secular government. But one of the things that concerns me about the current political debate is that we're quite theocratic in nature. We're trying to pursue the perfect world now when God says it's only going to come when he brings it later on. And because we're trying to pursue it now, we're going to immense lengths and difficulties to slander and slaughter kind of people that get in the way, not literally in a kind of war sense, but there's kind of an intense effort to bring what God says is only going to come at the end of time when he comes to restore creation to what it should have been now. And I don't think we should be trying to achieve that. I could talk about this subject all day, but absolutely not. We should not pursue a theocracy.
Oh, thank you. I think we've got two more for you.
Great.
What would Christians do if God's law opposed government law? Would they commit a crime for God?
Good question. And it's one that lots of Christians have wrestled with recently. So God tells us we should meet together as a church. We should worship him. We should even sing. That's a command. And so should Christians at the moment, or maybe this is more relevant a few months ago when we couldn't meet, when we weren't allowed to sing in church, should Christians oppose the government? Now, again, I think Christians will have different answers on this. The big principle, though, is we often look for the exceptions. We often say, oh, when can I disobey government? But Romans 13 and 1 Peter 3 tell Christians to obey government, to submit to the authorities, as does several other places. And so the big rule for Christians is, yeah, they should obey the government. But our temptation is to jump straight to the exceptions and think, how can I break this? That being said, I think there are occasions when the Bible talks or commends those that break the law. So there's an example where the ancient Egyptians promised to or tell Israelites to kill all the baby boys, and the Hebrew midwives say no, and they're celebrated by God for doing that. So that's a case of trying to save life. You have another example where some characters called, some people called Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are forced by the Babylonian government to bow down and worship the Babylonian god. And they don't do it. They say, I can't do that because I serve God. I can't worship him. And they are commended. And there's a final one there are a few others as well, but the kind of final one I'm going to touch upon in the New Testament, where people are told to stop telling people about Jesus, stop preaching the gospel. And they are commended by God, even though they've broken the laws of the land. So I think general principles derived from that are, if it's a case of saving life, or if we're forced to not worship God and worship something else, or not even speak about God, then we can perhaps think about disobeying government. But that is an exception, not the norm. We're to obey governments. And the thing I find particularly striking on this is lots of the Bible was written under governments who were oppressive and abusive towards Christians, and yet they're still encouraged to live according to the government rules. So yeah, I think exceptions are if it's to save life, and if there's a good argument for fighting against injustice and unjust government, or if we're told to not worship or speak of Jesus.
Thank you very much. I think this is the last one now. Are there political parties that better express Christian values, morality than others?
Good question. I kind of mentioned how I think we're very fortunate to live in the UK, where, broadly speaking, every party pursues justice and seeks to care for those under its rule. And if you look at somewhere like Psalm 72, the king, the government is encouraged to promote justice, to care for the needy, to promote prosperity. And I think largely, most of the parties, in fact, all the parties in the UK try to do these things. They won't do it perfectly. And as I said, there'll be some ways and laws that they pursue that God would not be happy with and not disagree with, would disagree with. But I think in the UK, we've got great freedom to choose. Different Christians will have different convictions on which party represents them more. If you've got a Christian mate, chat to them, see what they think. If you get in touch with members of the CEO, I'm sure they'd love to chat to you. I think we've got quite a lot of freedom. Partly going back to the theocracy point, I'm not a fan of kind of a Christian party that seeks to represent God's rule, because I think we're flawed human beings. Even Christians, we're sinners. And we've got to be incredibly careful when we speak about representing God in politics, that we're not just pursuing our own agenda with a God label. And so I think, I personally would prefer to go for a party that's a secular party and try and be a Christian witness within that.
Well, thank you. That's interesting. Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening, Tom.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been great. Thoroughly enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.